So today is a really exciting day because, like clockwork, 4 to 5 weeks after I planted my saffron corms this year, I got my first blooms. And this has been the case every year since I first started growing saffron in 2021. So, hi there. I am Tara and I live in the Bay Area, and I have been growing saffron in my Mediterranean climate, like I said, since 2021. But when I first started growing saffron, I searched far and wide over the internet, on YouTube, for resources for the home gardener for growing saffron. But they were surprisingly really sparse. There were some resources from farmers that had been growing them, but it's really not the same when you're growing it in your backyard. So I'm proud to say that as of the making of this video, I am, I think, the only resource on the internet that has a documented journey on growing saffron for the home gardener. So stay tuned. This video is a compilation of my entire 4-year journey, all in one video. Now, I have been publishing the videos along the way during this journey, and I've got them all in a playlist called Growing Saffron on my channel. However, let's face it, YouTube's playlists are just not the easiest to navigate, and you really want to watch this story in chronological order as it unfolds. And then probably most importantly, I did not document my year 1 journey, even though I have all the footage. I did not compile that into a video. So let's fix that right now and jump into the very first time I planted saffron in September 2021. So I got my saffron corms, 24 of them, from Renee's garden. Nice large size corms. The instructions said I needed to plant them as soon as I got them. It was September, time for saffron to wake up from dormancy, and I got them into containers and started them indoors. A month later, I got them in the garden. Let's watch the footage. My saffron bulbs have all sprouted. Let's go ahead and plant these. I'm going to have to cover this up with something because my squirrels are in hunting mode right now. They're collecting acorns, they're bearing them, and this is quite a tasty morsel for them. I'm going to go ahead and finish planting these up. So the saffron grew beautifully after I planted it outside, and on November 4th, I got the biggest surprise of my life. My saffron has finally bloomed. I am absolutely loving the gorgeous blooms. I'm going to flip the camera around and bring you up close so you can see it. And what is really interesting about it is that I did not expect that the scent of the bloom was going to be any different than saffron, which I'm very familiar with because we use it a lot in Indian cooking. It is very different. It smells more delicate, like jasmine, not exotic like the saffron scent. So one of those interesting things that you would only know if you grew your own saffron. I really did not expect to get blooms so quickly. I was so pleasantly surprised. I just could not get over the beauty of the flower. And the most surprising thing for me was the scent of the blossom, which was nothing like I would have expected it to be. It didn't smell like saffron at all, but it was just intoxicatingly amazing. So let's watch my very first harvest video. And at the end of this short, I also share some of my favorite ways to use saffron in recipes. So speaking of recipes, I think it's really worth it to watch just this one recipe, which is, I think, the easiest dessert that you can possibly make, especially with saffron. Just 3 ingredients, and as long as you've got Greek yogurt, you can make Shrikand, which is a very popular dessert, especially where my husband comes from in Gujarat in northern India.
Enjoy this creamy, dreamy 3-ingredient yogurt dessert, which features saffron as the star ingredient. Simply mix Greek yogurt with sugar or any sweetener of your choice. Then powder a pinch of saffron with a little sugar and fold it into the sweetened yogurt. Top it with your favorite nuts or layer it with chopped mango for that extra flair and flavor.
So that was year one. And I harvested, I think, about 20 or so blossoms. And even though I got very little saffron, a little goes a long way. And it was just such a thrill to use my homegrown saffron in recipes that year. Now, I didn't know very much at all about aftercare. In fact, I didn't even know what would happen to saffron after the blooms were done. So I did not record very much footage of that. I did record more of that aftercare in year two. However, year one, I just kind of watched it grow, watched it produce that leafy foliage, and then watch it kind of disappear for the next several months. In fact, I was convinced that I had lost all my saffron because nothing happened after about April. And then September 2022 came along, and let's watch what happened.
Hi, green lovers. Well, last year, almost to the day, I planted about 25 bulbs of saffron, and they grew, they produced the beautiful flowers. I managed to harvest a whole bunch of saffron. It was all great. But at the end of that season, I was supposed to dig up the saffron bulbs and put it away in a cool, dark place for the rest of the season until I was ready to plant it again this year, which is about now. Well, folks, I have a confession to make. I did nothing of the sort. I left the saffron bulbs in there all summer long. I don't know what happened to them. Today I'm digging them out, and the good news is I do have a lot of bulbs. The bad news is I do not know whether they are viable. Well, we're going to find out. Nothing like a gardening experiment on some pretty expensive bulbs. Let's see how it goes. Here's the thing though, I actually have a lot more than the 25 that I planted. Probably easily 50, maybe even more bulbs. I'm going to actually count them. But I want to show you how they are looking. They're a pretty sorry sight. And before I dig up the last batch, I'll show you what I'm doing. Okay, so the saffron is growing somewhere in here. The soil was all the way up to the top. You can see it has dropped significantly. I've got all kinds of plants and flowers that I had planted. Those are all dried out. These are sweet alyssum. Let's see what's going on with the saffron. I can already see some of the bulbs here. It's actually a pretty decent looking bulb, and it does feel nice and firm. Let's hope they're viable. Let's dig out a few more. That's what that looks like. Another nice looking one. Some more. Let's go ahead and dig all of them out, and let's see how many I get. Okay, so I did some rough grading. Large, medium, small. I have 22 large, I have 55 medium, and I've got 83 small. That's a total of 160 bulbs that I got from my initial 25 bulb investment. That's not bad actually. That's more than 6 times the number of the original. Though I have to say that most of the original bulbs were in this larger size as far as I can recall, which I only got 22 of. But you know what? They produce lots of babies in spite of all my neglect. Now the thing is, are they gonna grow? Well, we're gonna find out. Okay, so I went ahead and refreshed the soil, and I am going to be digging holes about 2 inches or so deep, and I'm spacing these about 3 inches or so apart, 3 to 4 inches apart. Now you want to plant it so that the pointy side is up and the dull side is down. And extremely important that you keep this thing covered with some kind of mesh, especially if you've got rodents. They absolutely love this stuff. They will dig up and eat these tasty morsels. So I've got this mesh. This is a 1/2 inch hardware cloth. And after I plant this, I'm going to actually place this in. I'm going to put a brick on top of this. And once they start sprouting, I'll maybe fold this over and kind of raise this as it goes. But yeah, these are very, very vulnerable to all kinds of critters digging them up and eating them. I've got squirrels, I've got voles, I've got moles, I've got rats, I've got the gamut. So I have to protect my saffron. I will continue this recording after I see them starting to sprout, if I see them starting to sprout. Well, today is the 6th of October, and I wanted to show you something. My saffron that I planted on the 16th of September is starting to sprout. That's the great news. The bulbs are still viable. Isn't that awesome? I'm looking here and there. I am seeing little sprouts coming out. I counted about 7 altogether. I think I planted maybe 30 or so in this, so don't know what the bulb germination rate is going to be, but we'll see. I am just happy that they are not all duds.
Well, it is 4 weeks since I planted my saffron bulbs, and guess what? I have got a beautiful blossom already. So I got about 14 blossoms that year, and to be honest, I was very disappointed. I was expecting a lot more blossoms in year two compared to year one, and that didn't happen. I kind of felt like a failure. I didn't record much footage. I thought that I was done for with saffron, and then didn't record anything until January 2023. So let's watch that.
About this time of year, which is late January, early February, the saffron enters a vegetative growth state, which is when it produces all this luscious green growth. Now, it is done flowering for the year, and this is the stage where it is actually building a lot of nutrition that it is pumping into the bulbs, and then it's dividing bulbs, it's growing the existing bulbs, and really getting all set for next year. So you want to give it a balanced fertilizer at this stage. Something that is higher in phosphorus would actually be exceptionally good to build out those bulbs, because the larger bulbs are the ones that will produce flowers for you in the upcoming season. The bulbs need to be at least 9 to 10 centimeters in circumference. That's about 4 inches. So fertilize your plants now while they're producing that massive foliage so that they can build out those large bulbs and produce gorgeous blossoms for you later in the year. Within about maybe 3 months or so, this is all going to die back, and it is going to go into a dormant state and stay that way until around about late August, early September, when it will come back, and the first thing that will show up is that beautiful flower. Look how gorgeous this growth is. It's about, at least I'd say, about 2 feet long. Yeah, saffron. It's one of those things that home gardeners don't grow enough, but maybe should, especially if you live in a Mediterranean climate like I do in Northern California. And if you're wondering what this chicken wire is all about, I usually put this on when my saffron is first starting to sprout, because during that time is when the squirrels and other critters notice the green growth and they come and they dig up all the bulbs and eat them. Yummy, yummy. Don't want that to happen. I can actually take it off at this time of year. It's no longer attractive to the squirrels, but definitely when you're starting to see those shoots in late fall, you want to make sure that this is covered, or critters might get to it. Remember those beautiful super long green leaves that I showed you in my March video? Well, it's mid-April now and this is what they look like, which means that the plants that produced those beautiful flowers and then worked hard at growing and dividing bulbs are now ready to go dormant. Saffron bulbs are native to Mediterranean climates characterized by hot, dry summers and warm, wet winters. They require a hot, dry, dormant period. So at this point, you need to stop watering and move the plants to a dry location in your garden if growing in a container. If in ground, know that they will get wet with the occasional summer rain, but avoid getting them wet from daily watering. They should be located in a dry area of the garden. Then just leave it alone until September, when it wakes up and the cycle repeats.
So overall, year two left me feeling really confused and not knowing what comes next. I again searched for videos. No one on YouTube or on the internet seemed to be documenting other than what happens in year one with planting of the saffron and harvesting the blooms. And then after that, nothing. I just had to figure it out on my own. So year three happened September 2023, and I dug out those corns, and that's when I discovered saffron's nasty little secret. Let's watch. Hey folks, it's mid-September and it is that time of year when I get to plant the world's most expensive spice, saffron. Saffron grows wonderfully in my Northern California Zone 9B, very hot, very dry summer Mediterranean climate. And this is my third year growing saffron. So in today's video, I'm going to dig up a pot of saffron, which I planted last year, and let it dry out over the summer and see whether they have multiplied. And then we're actually going to plant up some saffron. I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. And you can expect to get blooms as quickly as 4 weeks from the date of planting. That's how fast saffron grows. So let's go ahead and dig up some saffron and see how many bulbs we get. So in this planter, I planted about a dozen bulbs last year. Let's see how many those multiplied to. Now I usually put a good thick layer of mulch over this. In fact, there was some sweet alyssum growing in this as well, so that added some nice protection to the bulbs. And let's see what we have. Gotta dig gently so I don't destroy any of the bulbs. There we go. You can see them already popping up. And these little ones, I didn't plant any little ones in this last year, so these are all new. Look right there, you can see in action that this one bulb has divided into 1, 2, 3 bulbs. All right, so I dug up a total of 62 bulbs from the original 12 that I planted. And as you can see, most of them are really, really small. So these are the only ones, these 6 are the only ones that I think will produce blossoms this year. These are maybe, and then there's a whole bunch of teeny tiny ones that probably won't produce for another 3 or 4 years. So as you can see, the return on investment is great. It's probably about 5-fold the number of bulbs compared to how many I planted, but the chances of blooms have been reduced drastically. So this year I'm going to do something a little bit different. I've actually brought in a secret weapon to help with the growth of bulbs rather than the division of bulbs. And that is, I'm going to be using a phosphorus fertilizer, and this is bone meal. So I'm going to be using this at the bottom of the bulbs before I plant them, mix them into the soil. Now know that phosphorus doesn't travel very much in the soil, so you want to put it right around the place where the roots are going to be. Okay, so I've dug out all my bulbs from all the various parts of the garden that I had planted them. And this is what I have. I've got 18 bulbs that probably will produce blossoms this year. I've got about 30 in the maybe category. And I've got literally hundreds that won't produce for at least another 3 years or so. So this is saffron's dirty little secret, folks. It is the 3rd year that I'm growing saffron, and from my initial 24 bulb investment, where every one of them produced a bloom, this year I'm going to be getting only, if I'm lucky, 18 or so blooms. So I've not regained my investment. It's been, this is the 3rd year, and maybe next year I can hope to go back to normal. Of course, by then I will have other bulbs also starting to develop, so that's a good thing. But it really takes quite a few years before you recoup your initial investment in saffron. So I'd say at this point that it's a luxury item and you grow it for fun, but are you really growing it for practical reasons? Probably not. So let's go ahead and get these planted now. I'm going to do something different this year, and I'm hoping that that will increase the size of the bulbs. Like I said, I'm going to be adding that bone meal, that phosphorus. So let's see if that makes a difference. So let me show you my potting soil and how I'm getting that thing set up. I hope you're finding this video interesting and useful in some way so far, folks, and I sure would appreciate a big thumbs up if you are. So I'm using some homemade potting soil, but really you can use anything you like. What I've got here is some potting soil that I used last year. I dumped it out and I added some compost to it. I also added some slow release fertilizer, and then I'm going to be adding this. Oh, and I also added some worm castings. I add that to everything. So the way that you apply phosphorus is really, you want it to be as close to the roots as possible. You don't want it to be too deep down. Saffron doesn't have very deep roots. It doesn't go deep down. So you want to keep it as superficial as possible. You're going to be planting the bulbs about 2 to 3 inches deep. And so I filled up the pot, but I've not filled it up to the top yet. I filled it up to the point where I know that the roots of the saffron are going to reach into. I'm going to just sprinkle a handful of phosphorus-based fertilizer here, in this case bone meal, like I said. And then I'm going to fill up another couple of inches, and then I'm going to add just a little bit more phosphorus around the bulb so that as I water it and it settles, it goes right to where it needs to be. That's it. So I worked it into the first couple of inches, 2 to 3 inches of soil. And so now let's go ahead and plant our saffron bulbs.
So I'm only going to be planting my larger bulbs in these spots, but I am going to be planting all of the smaller bulbs as well. I'll just put them in some window boxes. So lay them out. I'm going to be planting 9 in this and 9 in the other. They need to be about 2 to 3 inches apart and about 2 to 3 inches deep. So pretty easy. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I've got 7 in here. That's good enough, I think. So push it all the way down so it is about 2 or 3 inches deep. Now, this potting soil is kind of moist, but you do not want to actually water the bulbs again until they begin sprouting, because bulbs that are frequently watered do tend to rot. So I'm just going to let the moisture of the potting soil trigger the growth process. I'm going to put this somewhere shady, and it should sprout in about a couple of weeks or so. And frankly, it should produce blooms in about 4 to 6 weeks. I've had it produce blooms as soon as 4 weeks. Because, you know, when I plant these bulbs, there already is the flower in them. It is not determined by the fertility of the soil or anything like that. The bulb already knows whether it's going to produce a flower or not, and that's why the size of the bulb really, really matters. My very first saffron of 2023 has opened. It's really easy to harvest. All you need to do is collect these gorgeous stigma, these orange things. This is what the saffron is. And just give it a gentle tug. And there you go. Just like that, I've harvested my saffron. There's one more strand that I've got to pick, but this thing needs to dry for a few weeks. It doesn't even smell like what you would think saffron to smell like until it is dried for a few weeks. But the perfume of this flower is absolutely incredible. So my saffron flower is gone today. It bloomed just yesterday, and today it's gone. I harvested the stigma, but what I wanted to show you was at the base of the plant. You can see there are at least 4 other shoots coming out. And for me, that's amazing how just one little bulb has the potential to produce multiple blooms and multiple shoots. Now, not all of these are going to develop flowers. Maybe 1 or 2 may if I'm lucky, but it's going to produce a lot of greenery, a lot of really long greenery that is going to now build up that energy into the bulb or bulbs as they start to split under the ground. Now, I planted my saffron bulbs a month ago, and these were my extras. I didn't quite get around to planting them, and I just left them indoors and forgot about them. And guess what, guys? They're actually taking action themselves and starting to grow. Look at how they grow. They just push out these little shoots from the side, of course, from the top as well. I laid out about 70 bulbs here. These are itty bitty little things. Who knows when they're going to flower, but we're going to let nature do its thing. How do you know if your saffron plant is getting ready to flower? You see this little white thing in the middle here? That's a bud. Check this out. This is the next stage. You can actually see a little bit of purple. And then finally, it turns into this. And this is going to bloom today. And they're open. Time to harvest them. You want to harvest them as soon as they open as much as possible. I'll let those dry for 2 weeks. Look at all my saffron blooms. I got actually 5 of them open today. I've harvested them already. That's why you don't see the orange stamen. But I'm getting quite a harvest this year so far. I'm very pleased.
So I planted roughly 150 corms in year 3 and gave away several as well. And I continued to experiment with saffron post-bloom and learned a few more things, mostly that saffron hates competition.
Just wanted to give you guys an update on my saffron. It is done blooming for the season. So in these 2 pots and in that planter, I planted the larger bulbs. So let's see how many, maybe about 5 or so shoots on an average from each of the large bulbs, and not all of them produced blooms, but I planted 18 large bulbs and I got 18 blooms. So some of them produced 2, some of them produced none, but on an average they've multiplied quite a bit, at least visually, and underneath it's probably even more bulbs that have divided. These are my mediums, these two, and these have pushed out, I'd say, roughly 3 or so shoots on an average per medium-sized bulb. And then moving on over here to the small, these were all small bulbs, and I planted a lot of them, as you can see, and they've only produced 1 shoot or so per bulb. So bigger is better. The large bulbs produce more shoots as well as the blooms. The small ones produce 1 shoot per bulb and no blooms. So these saffron bulbs are growing in flower boxes. These were the smallest bulbs, but even these are growing quite decent, and I hope they're building some nice large bulbs. These didn't produce any flowers for me. They were real tiny bulbs when I planted them in here. And these are the medium-sized bulbs. Yes, Claytonia, Miner's lettuce, is growing and really choking out all of these plants, and I don't think they're growing as well. Hard to tell, but I'm just letting it be. Again, gardening is all about fun experiments, and I love Claytonia. I planted it one year, and every year I get it everywhere in my garden, and this year decided it loved my saffron flower boxes. So I am enjoying them in smoothies. They're delicious superfood, but I have a feeling that my saffron is going to take a hit.
So I learned so much in year 3, and I decided it was time to document a frequently asked questions video because I had gotten so many questions, and I wish I had known the answers to those questions when I first started my saffron journey. So I made a 19 most frequently asked questions video. Let's watch it.
Look at all my saffron blooms. I got actually 5 of them open today. It's late August, and it's getting to be that time of year when I wake my saffron bulbs out of dormancy to get them ready for a new season. And if we haven't met before, my name is Tara, and I live in the beautiful Bay Area, and I am growing saffron for 4 years now. So today we're going to be talking about some of the most frequently asked questions that I've received over the past years of growing saffron, and some of the lessons that I've learned the hard way. So first we're going to be talking about some of the questions you might have before you even buy saffron. Things like, should you be even growing saffron in the first place? We'll then move on to planting and some of the questions about how to plant, where to plant, what kind of soil it needs, etc. And then we'll move on to growing and care. Questions like, when does saffron bloom? How do I care for it while it's during the blooming season, aftercare, and so on. And then let's talk a little bit about harvesting saffron, processing it and storing it, and maybe even some of my favorite recipes that I use saffron for. The first and probably one of the most common questions that I get is, can I grow saffron? I live in this really cold climate, or maybe it's a very hot and humid climate. Can I grow saffron? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you can grow saffron anywhere. It is really one of the easiest plants that you can grow. But there are a couple of caveats. The first thing to understand is that saffron, or Crocus sativa, is native to Mediterranean climates. So the hot, long, dry summers and the short, mild winters, those are the types of climates that saffron thrives in. My climate over here in the Bay Area is very typical to saffron's native growing conditions. So saffron grows very easily where I live. Now, if you live in a really cold place where the ground freezes really hard during winter, you would need to dig up your saffron and put it away until the weather conditions are right to get it in the ground or in a container again. Similarly, if you live in a climate where it is very hot, but it is also extremely humid, you still want to be able to dig up those bulbs and put them away for the dormant period, because saffron needs a long, hot, dry summer where it gets practically no water. It needs to sleep. As long as you can simulate those conditions for it, then you should be able to grow saffron anywhere. Another thing that you also need to be aware of is that saffron is very sensitive to the ambient conditions. That's what triggers when it starts to grow again. So during our hot, dry summers, there is no trace of saffron. Even if there's a little sprinkle of water here or there, those things are still sleeping. However, when the weather starts to cool down just a little bit, it's still nice and warm, but it's on the cooling down phase. So the really late part of summer, early fall, for me, that's when the saffron bulbs wake up and start to grow. And that's when I actually want to start giving them water and promote their growth. Now, if you live in a very cold climate, the conditions that I just described might happen a little bit earlier. Maybe in the August timeframe is when you need to wake up your saffron. So check into that, check what month your saffron grows best in your particular growing zone. Do a little bit of Googling and find out, and you really should be able to grow saffron anywhere. And the other thing also to be aware of is that saffron grows and produces its blooms within a very short period of time. Within about 4 to 6 weeks, believe it or not, from the time that it wakes up, it will produce its first bloom, and then it will continue to produce for about a couple of weeks or so, and it's all done with the blooming. After that, it produces a lot of green growth, and then it's saving energy into the bulbs to produce for next year's. So if your season is super short and saffron doesn't have sufficient time to bloom and then produce the greenery and then go dormant, you might need to rebuy your saffron bulbs every year. But if you live in the magic zones between zones 6 through 9, you should be able to grow saffron no problem at all. The next question that I get a lot is saffron easy to grow? Yes, it is extremely easy to grow. As long as you get it in the ground when the weather is starting to cool off after the heat of summer, that thing should sprout and it should grow and it should produce blooms for you and finish all of that within 2 months. Oh, here's a good one. Should I buy cheap or expensive saffron bulbs? Yes, I have noticed that they come in a wide range of prices. And first off, you want to buy from a reputed source, and I will put a few that I recommend in the description. But even in these reputed sources, if you find a big difference in price, it's probably due to the size of the bulb. You see, saffron actually multiplies really, really quickly. It divides and produces a ton of new baby corms. However, it does take up to 3 years for those little tiny corms to grow to a size that they actually produce a bloom. So usually when you see saffron bulbs that are larger, say about 1 inch or more, those are the ones that you can pretty much be sure that they will produce a bloom that same year. The ones that are tinier than a ½ inch or a centimeter, those will probably not produce for you this year. They may produce next year. Which leads me to the next question, which is, can I expect blooms the first year? Absolutely, you can. The interesting thing about saffron corms is that by the end of the season, after it has produced those long green leaves and has saved up energy, it has also already created the flower. That's why it's able to flower so quickly. So the corm or the saffron bulb actually knows whether it's going to flower the following year, even before it goes dormant. You can definitely expect your saffron to bloom and maybe even produce a couple of blooms if the corm is large enough. If it's not, you might have to wait another year or 2. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about planting saffron. So when do you plant saffron? Like I mentioned earlier, if you live in a warm Mediterranean climate like I do, typically mid-September is when I get the saffron into the ground or into containers. Now, if you live in a colder place, then you probably want to plant it somewhere in the August timeframe. Know that you are aiming to get your saffron in the ground at least 8 weeks before your first frost so that it can complete its blooming and go dormant by the time your first frost hits. So where in your garden is the best place to plant your saffron? Now, saffron likes a lot of sun. It doesn't like very, very hot days because it's dormant during that time, but once the weather starts to cool off, plant it in the brightest part of your garden. What kind of soil does saffron need? Saffron needs well-draining soil. You want to plant it about 2 to 3 inches deep, and it absolutely needs to drain well. So if you've got hard clay soil like I do, definitely amend it or plant in containers. And does saffron grow well in containers? Absolutely. In fact, I've been growing saffron only in containers for the past 3 years, and then last year I planted a few in ground here or there just to kind of see whether they like being in ground, and we'll see how they do this year. So stay tuned. I will keep publishing videos on my saffron journey, and in fact I've got an entire playlist documenting my journey with growing saffron right from when I first started almost 4 years ago until now. So I've got plenty of tips and plenty of learnings along the way, and you particularly want to watch the video about saffron's dirty little secret. I'll put a link to it at the end of this one. Now let's talk about growing and care for saffron. So when does saffron bloom? Saffron's botanical name is Crocus certivus. So yes, it belongs to the crocus family, but its behavior is completely opposite of your typical crocuses. Usually crocuses are the first flowers to bloom in late winter, early spring. They even poke through the snow. Saffron, on the other hand, blooms during late summer and early fall, and its blooming window is really short. Only a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, is when it produces all its blooms, and it's done for another year. So how long does it take for saffron to grow? Now, saffron needs to be woken up from its dormancy, and the way that you do that is you take it from wherever you might have stored it in your garage, or if it is in containers like mine are, then all you need to do is start to water it, and once it senses that water and the right climatic conditions around it, it will start to grow. And believe it or not, I have got a bloom as soon as 4 weeks after I started watering my saffron. Around about mid-September is when I wake it up, and mid-October I get my first bloom. Another question I get a lot is, does saffron need a lot of water? No, saffron does not need a lot of water. I do water it in order to wake it up, and the soil is fairly moist at that point in time. But then after that, only when I notice that the soil is starting to dry out, that's when I give it more water. Most of that growth is coming from the bulb, and so all it needs to do is have that initial moisture where the bulb will swell up, and then it starts growing, and you really don't need to give it much water after that. Here's a good one. What kind of pests is saffron prone to? Not very many, but there is one really nasty one that you need to worry about, and that is squirrels, or any kind of rodent, rats as well. They love saffron bulbs. So if you are not protecting your saffron bulbs, and if you've got squirrels or rats in your garden, they will find your saffron bulbs. So I always cover my containers, all my in-ground space with chicken wire whenever I wake up my saffron bulbs, because until then they don't seem to know about the existence of the bulbs. But once the saffron bulbs start to wake up, I don't know what it is, but critters come from everywhere to eat those delicious morsels. So cover your saffron bulbs. They're too expensive to feed to the squirrels. All right, so now let's talk about harvesting and processing your saffron. That first bloom and those beautiful orange stigma that is going to turn into your saffron. First, the bloom has an amazing scent. So make sure that you smell the blooms and enjoy the perfume. And by the way, if you know what saffron smells like, those blooms smell nothing like it. I was also really surprised. And the blooms are so pretty, so do take the time to enjoy them. But you do need to harvest the orange stigma as soon as possible. The flowers typically open early in the morning, and as soon as they open, you've got to harvest them because they deteriorate very rapidly after that. So all you need to do is gently pull at the stigma and it should come out in your hand. And then how do you process this saffron after harvesting? Did you know that there are various grades of saffron? The very tip of the stigma, that's where the most potent flavor and scent is. And that is the very best grade. On the other hand, I actually use the entire stigma. So I guess I use second grade saffron, but that's okay. That's good enough for me. The saffron scent does not come through, like I said, immediately. It takes a while for the perfume to develop. And so you need to dry it for about a week, maybe even 2 weeks. I kind of just leave it there and forget about it for a while, and that's when the saffron perfume actually develops. And then when it's completely dry, you can take it and store it in a little jar. I actually store mine in the refrigerator in a nice airtight jar. Okay, so what if you don't live in the Goldilocks zone like I do in this Mediterranean climate here in California? Well, then you do need to potentially dig up your saffron corms and store them in a dry, dark place until they're ready to be woken up again. And you can just wrap it in shredded paper. Do not store it in a plastic bag. That will cause humidity, which will cause the corms to develop mold. And before you store it, make sure that you clean it up just a little bit, remove some of that dirt with a soft brush. Okay, let's talk about some of my favorite ways to use saffron. I've got 3 or 4 ways that I love to use saffron. One of my favorite ways is by mixing it with Greek yogurt and sugar. It's a dish we call Shrikand in India, and all you need to do is take a few strands of saffron, maybe 3 or 4 strands. You put a little bit of sugar in a mortar pestle thing and crush it, and then you mix it in with Greek yogurt and some sugar, and oh, it is so good. The other way that I like to use it is in rice pudding. So the dish that we make in India is called kheer, and it's made by boiling rice in milk until the rice is really, really cooked well. And then you add sugar, you add saffron, and then you add nuts and maybe some raisins as well. Oh, so good. And then there is a savory way to use saffron. Many of us are familiar with a Spanish dish called paella. Well, we've got a similar rice dish in India that we call pulao, that is made with delicious basmati rice and some spices, maybe some onions, and oh, the secret ingredient, saffron. That will give it a lovely orange tinge, as well as, oh, the flavor kicks it up several notches. And one of the easiest ways to use saffron is just by mixing it with some milk and some sugar. It makes a most delicious golden drink. So I hope you try a few of these recipes, and if you've got any other questions about saffron, please do ask them in the questions below.
And then it was time to plant my year 4 saffron. And you have to see it to believe it. Let's roll.
It's mid-September, I'm wearing my purple and orange shirt, and that combination can mean just one thing. It's time to plant saffron. Let's do it. This is my 4th year growing saffron. So I've been growing saffron ever since September 2021, when I got my first set of 20 corms from Renee's garden. Nice, beautiful, large corms. And ever since then, they've been multiplying like crazy every year. But saffron does have a dirty little secret, and I have actually created a video all about that, which I will put a link to, which I discovered last year. Anyway, we'll check out to see whether they multiplied again this year, whether there are some large decent corms that I can plant. Then we'll go ahead and plant it. I've actually prepared a bed in ground this time to plant my saffron. I've been growing it in containers for the most part, except in one little patch where I planted some teeny tiny little baby daughter bulbs last year, and I want to see what they did in ground as well. So let's go do all of that. Okay, so this is the pot in which I planted 7 large, decently large sized bulbs last year, and I'm just dying to see how they did. And I planted some, I'd say, medium to small size bulbs over here, but let's see how the 7 bulbs have multiplied. Let me bring you up a little closer. Okay, the moment of truth. This is all the saffron fronds. There is a lot of it that just sort of turns into mulch after the season is over. And let's take a look. I can see some already. I mean, each saffron bulb produces at least 5, has been my experience. Now, they're not very large, but still, they multiply like crazy. There's another. And yet another. So that's like 7 of them altogether so far. That's a nice, decent sized bulb. It's a beautiful large bulb. Another nice large bulb. Okay, let's go ahead and count these up and see how many bulbs we got from our initial 7 bulb investment. I went ahead and I sorted them and I counted them up, and out of the 7 bulbs I now have 42. So that is 6 times the original number of bulbs. But this is saffron's dirty little secret. I do not have as many of the large size bulbs that I planted last year. So I planted 7 bulbs, but this year only 4 of them are the size of the 7 that I planted last year. So yes, I've got a whole bunch of new bulbs, but obviously not all of the mother bulbs were able to survive into the next year. Some of them were just, I guess, cannibalized by the daughter bulbs, and I've got a lot more daughter bulbs, but not as many of those large size bulbs. Okay, so why is it so important to have the larger size corms versus these tiny little corms. The reason is because when it comes to saffron corms, size does matter. So these larger corms, they already have the bloom or blooms in them versus the smaller one. It's unlikely that I'll get a bloom this year, maybe next year, maybe the year after that, but it takes about 3 to 5 years for a corm of this size to grow to about this size and produce blooms. So that's why when you buy saffron corms, buy the largest corms possible. They'll probably be more expensive, but that's why. Okay, let's go ahead and empty out the rest of these flower boxes. I've got 4 of these and see how many we've got, and I'm going to be grading them large, medium, and small. Now, a lot of the mulch that you see here actually came from the saffron fronds themselves, but there was a lot of weeds growing in here too. I had a lot of Claytonia, and I strongly advise that you do not let weeds grow with the saffron. Saffron is not a good competitor when it comes to weeds, and saffron will give up. So definitely remove any weeds as soon as you see them. Here they come. Nice little clump right here. I'd say medium to small. That's interesting. These were all medium to small size bulbs, and I'm actually getting some pretty decent large size bulbs in this one. So they have grown since last year. That's good. Okay, so guys, I have great news. So I just emptied out that planter box and I got at least about 7 more decent large size bulbs from the medium to small that I planted in there. So is this the year that I'm finally going to get even on my initial investment? Looks like it is, and maybe looks like I'm going to get even more than the initial 20 investment. So let's go ahead and dig up all the others and I'll do a final count for you. I am done harvesting and I have gotten, a lot of bulbs. And I also learned a really important lesson that I want to share with you about how these bulbs multiply. So let's see if I can explain this to you the way that I understand it. Now, I read about it on the internet, and as you might imagine, there is just not a lot of information about growing saffron. It is not one of those things that every household grows. So a lot of it came from Reddit, from Quora, from farmers of saffron. And one of the things that I started to decipher from the way saffron multiplies is that there are 3 sizes of bulbs. Let's call them large, medium, and small. And the most important for the current year are the large, because they're going to be producing the flowers, and the small, because they're not going to be producing any flowers, but they are going to be multiplying like crazy. Now, the medium, this is the one that is kind of in that in-between state. It may not be large enough to produce a flower yet, but it's not in that active splitting mode like the smallest corm is. So this one will do nothing more than just grow a little larger and then maybe become like this next year. But it'll also maybe produce a couple of daughter corms, but it's going to put most of its energy into growing in size versus these that are going to be putting most of their energy into multiplying. Now, a few of these small ones will decide to turn into this and they will grow in size rather than do the splitting, but most of them are going to be splitting. And that's why you get so many saffron corms year over year, but not as many of the larger ones. That takes a few years to start to build up. And now the grand reveal. How many large corms did I actually get this year? I got at least 40 corms. Last year I had 18 corms. This year I got at least 40, maybe more. I was being a little conservative about the size. So I finally got not just a return on my investment, I got double of the return on my investment. So I'm going to be getting, I'm hoping, plenty of flowers this year, and next year is going to be even better. So the magic number of years, guys, starts at year 4. Year 4, year 5 onward, that's when you really start to get that full return on the investment in your initial saffron purchase. I'm going to be planting up my saffron in the 6x3 bed. Now this bed is perfect because I don't have irrigation installed and it's pretty difficult for me to access it. So I don't water it at all, which is fine because the rains are going to be starting and all I need to do is get that soil initially moist. Saffron does not require a lot of moisture. I just need to make sure that the soil is moist until it sprouts, and then if it starts to dry out, I'll give it a little water. But then what's going to happen is the rains are going to kick in, the saffron's going to be nicely watered. Saffron really does not need a lot of water at all, and it does not require much soil either, but the soil needs to be well draining. Just about 4 inches of soil is all that saffron needs, but really well draining. So I have amended this bed. I've added compost. It has got some of my native soil in it as well, which will supply any nutrients that it needs, but saffron really doesn't need much fertilizer. It's got everything that it needs right here in this bulb. So you want to go ahead and plant them about 3 to 4 inches deep and about 3 to 4 inches apart. I'm going to be planting the large corms in this bed. Okay, so I planted about 50 or 55 or so bulbs in here. About 40 of them were large, about 10 or 15 of them were medium to kind of semi-small. Now, very, very important, saffron is extremely prone to critters digging it up and eating it, especially squirrels, and I've got a lot of them. So I've got to cover it, and I'm going to be using plastic chicken wire to cover it. All done. Now let's go see how our teeny tiny in-ground saffron bulbs did. So here's the spot where I planted a whole lot, probably at least about 50 teeny tiny little saffron bulbs last year. But before we dig in here to see what we got, I sure would appreciate a thumbs up if you're getting any value from this video. It really helps support the channel, so thank you so much. All right, let's dig it up. Okay, I can see right off the bat a little tiny bulb. Digging further down, this soil was really dry and hard, and I actually had to come in this morning and moisten it up a little bit. Okay, folks, so I'm going to say that this was not very much of a success. And I think the reason was a couple of reasons. Number one, I planted these very late in the year, probably well past saffron growing season. And I also planted it in really, really hard clay soil. I didn't amend the soil before I planted it. So I think those were the two main reasons why I did not get much multiplication of these bulbs happening. So I'm going to amend the soil really, really well. And I'm going to replant in this area. And then the other thing that probably also happened is my squirrels may have discovered them. I've often seen little bits of fruit and things like that around here. So this is a favorite spot for the squirrels, and they probably ate a lot of them as well. So lessons learned. So what I don't share in the video is I actually went ahead and counted all the teeny tiny corms that I had harvested. And it was a total of, drum roll again, 670 corms. And out of these, 40 of them were those jumbo-sized corms. So I had made up my previous investment and then some, which was really quite thrilling. But then one of my viewers asked me a very interesting question. You see, I'd kept talking about return on investment and how it took me 3 years to get the return on investment. And she said, what if you aren't doing it for the investment? And that really got me thinking, because really, what was the return that I got? The beautiful blossoms that I would not have expected, that combination of colors, that pale purple and orange that nature put together to come together so beautifully. The scent of the blossom, that wonderful heady perfume, all of the research and the knowledge that I accumulated along the way, and then sharing it back with all of you and interacting with all of you. The questions that you asked
seeing so many of my videos explode in views because all of you were craving that knowledge. It was just such a fulfilling journey for me. So yep, that initial $20 investment turned into something that I really cannot put a price tag on. So if you're still with me, thank you for sticking around. And if you're a new saffron grower, I hope you get the confidence to grow the most wonderful saffron in your backyard. Until next time, live green and love your greens.